This is a true story. The events depicted occurred between December 1944 and July 1975. Some dialogue and internal thoughts have been dramatized for narrative purposes, but all major events, operations, and outcomes are historically documented. What you're about to hear changed the course of World War II and created one of the most shocking alliances in intelligence history. Madrid, Spain. August 7, 1975, Madrid, Spain. August 7, 1975. Inside a small Catholic chapel, dozens of elderly men in dark suits gather around a casket. Their weathered faces bear the marks of age, but also something else, something harder. The kind of hardness that comes from surviving wars most people only read about. As the priest completes his prayers, something extraordinary happens. In unison, these men raise their right arms in a stiff salute. Not to the cross, not to God, to the man in the casket. They begin to sing. Not hymns, the songs of the Third Reich. Hitler's favorite melodies echoing off the chapel walls in 1975, 30 years after Germany's defeat. Among the mourners, one man stands apart, younger than the others, watching from the shadows, his face partially hidden, as if from habit. As if concealment is second nature to him. This is Josef Rahnen, and here, in this chapel filled with former Nazi officers giving Hitler salutes, he is the only Jew. He flew here at his own expense, paid for his own hotel, came to pay respects to the man they're burying, a man who wore the uniform of the SS, a man who executed orders from Adolf Hitler himself. Why would a Holocaust survivor attend a Nazi funeral? To understand that, we need to go back 30 years. To December 1944, to a frozen checkpoint in Belgium, to a jeep carrying 3 men whose capture would trigger the most widespread paranoia in American military history. But even that's just the beginning of the story, because what happened during the Battle of the Bulge was merely the opening act. The real story, the one that would bind a Jewish spy and a Nazi commando in the strangest partnership in espionage history, that began 2 decades later, in the shadows of the Cold War. When Israel needed a monster to hunt monsters, this is the story of Operation Greif, and of what came after. The story of the man who wore 3 uniforms, October 22, 1944, the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. October 22, 1944. The Wolf's Lair, Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. A tall man with a distinctive scar across his left cheek stands before the Führer. His name is Otto Skorzeny, and at 36 years old he's already a legend. SS Obersturmbannführer, Lieutenant Colonel. But more than that, Hitler's favorite commando, the man they call the most dangerous man in Europe. Just over a year ago, Skorzeny led a glider assault on a mountaintop hotel in Italy, rescuing Benito Mussolini from captivity in a mission so audacious it made headlines worldwide. Weeks before this meeting, he orchestrated the kidnapping of the son of Hungary's regent, forcing the country to remain in Germany's orbit. Now, Hitler has another mission, one that will require deception on a scale never before attempted. The Ardennes offensive will decide the war in the West, Hitler tells him. The plan is ambitious, perhaps suicidal. German forces will smash through the thinly held American lines in Belgium's Ardennes Forest, drive to the port of Antwerp, split the Allied armies, and force them to negotiate peace. But speed is everything. The Germans must capture at least one bridge over the Meuse River intact before Allied engineers can destroy it. And that's where Skorzeny comes in. You will form a special brigade, Hitler says. Your men will wear American and British uniforms. They will infiltrate behind enemy lines. They will capture those bridges. Even Skorzeny, who has executed dozens of high-risk operations, pauses at this. Under the Hague Convention of 1907, Soldiers captured in enemy uniforms forfeit their rights as prisoners of war. They can be executed as spies. Hitler assures him it's legal, as long as his men remove the Allied uniforms before actually fighting. Just use them for infiltration, for spreading confusion. Skorzeny has 5 weeks to recruit and train a brigade for this mission Hitler names Operation Greif. Griffin. The mythical creature that's half eagle, half lion, though Greif also means grab in German. And grabbing is exactly what they plan to do. Within days, Skorzeny submits his requirements. He needs 300 men who speak English fluently and understand American idiom. He needs 15 Sherman tanks, 20 armored cars, 100 jeeps, 120 trucks, and enough American and British uniforms to outfit his entire brigade. On October 25th, the order goes out from Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel himself, distributed to every Wehrmacht headquarters on the Western Front. English-speaking volunteers wanted for secret commando operations. The order is so blatant, so obvious, that Skorzeny immediately requests permission to cancel the whole operation. Surely the Allies will intercept this and know something is coming. Permission denied. The mission proceeds. The volunteers begin arriving at the training camp at Grafenwöhr in eastern Bavaria. They come from all branches of the military, most having no idea what they've signed up for. Among them is Fritz Christ, a 21-year-old Luftwaffe private trained as an English translator. He's excited. Wonderful, he thinks. I'm going to interrogate American prisoners of war and stay well away from the fighting. The camp is surrounded by barbed wire. Security is extreme. One volunteer is shot when his letter home contains too much detail about what he's seen. Only after arrival do they learn their actual mission. And the reality of what Skorzeny has to work with would be comical if the stakes weren't so deadly. Of the 2,500 men eventually assembled, only 10 speak perfect English, with knowledge of American idioms. Another 30 to 40 speak English well but have no understanding of American slang. Between 120 and 150 speak English moderately well. The rest have only school-level English, barely able to say more than yes or no. Skorzeny writes in his notes, "After a couple of weeks, the result was terrifying. The men with minimal English are given special instructions. If approached by Americans, they are to exclaim, 'Sorry!' then open their trousers and hurry off, feigning an attack of diarrhea. Yes, that's the actual plan. The equipment situation is equally desperate. Instead of 15 Sherman tanks, Skorzeny receives 2, both in poor condition. One breaks down almost immediately. Instead of American armor, he gets 5 German Panther tanks, 6 armored cars, and 5 assault guns. They disguise the Panthers with sheet metal cladding, olive drab paint, and white star insignia. Even Skorzeny admits they would fool only very young American troops, seeing them from very far away at night. The uniforms are worse. Many are British, Polish, or Russian. Some are summer issue despite the December offensive date. Others bear bloodstains or prisoner of war markings. Units across Germany, confused by the request, just send whatever they can find. Skorzeny manages to acquire enough authentic American gear for only the commando teams, the men with the best English. These are formed into a special unit called Einheit Stielau, named after SS Captain Ernst Stielau, who will lead them. These men receive intensive training despite the compressed timeline. They study the organization of the American Army. They learn badges of rank, military customs, drill procedures. Some are sent to prisoner of war camps to practice their English with captured Americans. They watch American movies to perfect their accents and learn current slang. They memorize American brand names, sports teams, popular songs, Hollywood stars. They practice walking like Americans, smoking like Americans, chewing gum like Americans. One instructor teaches them to eat with the fork after laying down the knife, in the American style. Another shows them how to tap their cigarettes against the pack in an American way. The missions are divided into 3 categories. Demolition squads will destroy bridges, ammunition dumps, and fuel stores. Reconnaissance patrols will scout both sides of the Meuse River, passing false orders to American units, reversing road signs, removing minefield warnings, and cordoning off roads with warnings of non-existent mines. Lead commando units will work directly with attacking German forces, cutting telephone wires, destroying radio stations, and issuing false orders. Every man knows the risks. If captured in American uniform, execution is virtually certain. But there's another danger. In the chaos of battle, they might be shot by their own side if German troops mistake them for actual Americans. For identification, they'll use specific signals. Vehicles will display small yellow triangles. Tanks will maintain specific gun positions. Soldiers will wear colored scarves beneath their uniforms. On December 14th, Panzer Brigade 150 assembles near Bad Münstereifel. They're as ready as they'll ever be, which is to say, not very ready at all. But Hitler's offensive is about to begin, and ready or not, they're going in. December 16th, 1944. Before dawn. December 16th, 1944. Before dawn. Through the dark forests of the Ardennes, more than 200,000 German troops begin Hitler's last great offensive in the West. The initial assault achieves complete surprise. 4 inexperienced or battle-weary American divisions, thinly spread across an 80-mile front, suddenly face 30 German divisions supported by nearly 1,000 tanks. The German artillery barrage shatters the frozen morning. Searchlights bounce off low clouds to illuminate the battlefield. Infantry advances through the snow-covered forests. Panzers rumble forward on narrow roads. For the first hours, everything proceeds according to plan. The Einheit-Stielau teams infiltrate in the confusion. Dressed in American uniforms, driving captured jeeps, they slip through the chaos of the American withdrawal. One team drives directly into an American-held town, scouts all defenses, then redirects an American convoy of armor and supplies down the wrong road on their way out. 2 other teams successfully misdirect Allied convoys. They cut telephone wires. They remove road signs. They spread false rumors of German breakthroughs deeper than the actual penetrations. For a moment, it seems like Operation Greif might actually work. But the operation depends entirely on the rapid advance of the 1st SS Panzer Division, commanded by Joachim Peiper. If Peiper's armored spearhead breaks through quickly, Skorzeny's disguised troops can slip through and reach the bridges before American engineers destroy them. That breakthrough never comes. Fierce. American resistance at Elsenborn Ridge denies the Germans the northern roads they need. At St. Vith, American defenders fight ferociously, delaying the German timetable by nearly a week. By December 17th, Skorzeny realizes his mission's original aims are doomed. He attends a staff conference and suggests his brigade be used as a conventional unit. The request is approved, but the commando teams are already behind American lines. Some successfully complete their missions. Others are not so lucky. December 17th, 1944, around 7 a.m., a checkpoint outside Aywaille, Belgium. December 17th, 1944, around 7 a.m., a checkpoint outside Aywaille, Belgium. Sergeant William Creel of the American Military Police raises his hand as a jeep approaches. 3 men sit inside, wearing what looks like American uniforms, carrying what seems like American weapons. But something feels wrong. Creel has been warned about something impossible, something that contradicts everything he knows about warfare and honor. German soldiers might be operating behind American lines, dressed as American troops, speaking American words. He asks for the password. The men hesitate. He asks again. Their English falters. Then Creel notices the weapons. Steen guns. British weapons that no American patrol would carry. Within minutes, the three men are in custody. Under their olive drab uniforms, they wear German field gray. Unteroffizier Manfred Pernass, 23 years old, from Gollnow, Pomerania. He volunteered thinking it would be an adventure. Oberfähnrich Günther Billing, 21 years old, a dedicated Nazi who believed in the cause until his last breath. Gefreiter Wilhelm Schmidt, 24 years old, a quiet man who rarely spoke even to his fellow soldiers. They've just become the most infamous prisoners of the Battle of the Bulge. During interrogation, Schmidt makes a statement that electrifies Allied intelligence. He claims their mission is part of a larger operation to infiltrate Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force and capture or kill General Dwight Eisenhower himself. Whether Schmidt believed this rumor or was spreading deliberate disinformation remains unclear. The actual mission was to capture bridges, but his statement has immediate consequences. Within hours, security around Eisenhower is dramatically increased. The Supreme Commander finds himself virtually imprisoned in his headquarters at Versailles, surrounded by guards who check everyone entering the building. Eisenhower is reportedly furious at the confinement, especially when it extends through Christmas. After several days, he angrily declares he has to get out and doesn't care if anyone tries to kill him. But the paranoia spreads far beyond protecting Eisenhower. Allied forces, already reeling from the German offensive, now see potential infiltrators everywhere. Checkpoints appear throughout the Allied rear areas, greatly slowing the movement of troops and supplies, and at these checkpoints, American military policemen begin conducting the most unusual interrogations in military history. What is the capital of Illinois? Who won the World Series in 1940? Who is Mickey Mouse's girlfriend? What team plays at Wrigley Field? Who is married to Betty Grable? Where does the guard stand in a football formation? The questions range from state geography to baseball statistics to Hollywood gossip to American slang. MPs improvise constantly, creating new questions based on whatever American trivia they can think of. The system is chaotic and often absurd, but it reveals something profound about identity in the modern age. What we're witnessing here in these frozen Belgian checkpoints in December 1944 is perhaps the first large-scale deployment of cultural knowledge as a security mechanism. These MPs didn't realize they were pioneering a form of authentication that would echo through decades of security protocols to come. Think about it. When you reset a password today, you're asked for your mother's maiden name, your first pet, the street you grew up on. These are variations on the same principle those checkpoint guards discovered by accident. True identity is encoded not just in documents or physical characteristics, but in the accumulated knowledge of lived experience. The German infiltrators could study military manuals for months. They could memorize every rank insignia, every drill procedure, every piece of equipment. But they couldn't replicate 20 years of American childhood. They couldn't fake knowing the lineup of a baseball team they'd never heard of, or the answer to a cultural touchstone they'd never encountered. This wasn't just about catching spies. It was about the realization that culture itself could be weaponized, that the shared experiences of growing up in a particular place, at a particular time, created a form of knowledge so deeply embedded it became nearly impossible to counterfeit. General Omar Bradley is detained when he correctly identifies Springfield as the capital of Illinois. But the MP believes it's Chicago and holds him until his identity can be verified. Bradley later tells the Washington Post he was questioned 3 times. The first time by identifying Springfield as the capital of Illinois, the second by locating the guard between the center and tackle on a line of scrimmage. The third time by naming the then-current spouse of a blonde named Betty. Grable, Brigadier General Bruce Clarke, is held at gunpoint after incorrectly stating the Chicago Cubs play in the American League. Captain spends a week in detention after being caught wearing German boots he'd taken as souvenirs. British soldiers face particular difficulties. When reconnaissance officer David Niven encounters a guard demanding to know who won the 1940 World Series, he can only reply he hasn't the faintest idea. British troops who can't answer questions about American sports or geography are detained until their identities can be verified through other means. Some American soldiers give deliberately wrong answers to protest the absurd interrogations, resulting in their own detention. Others become angry at being questioned by junior enlisted men, creating confrontations that further slow movement. The paranoia affects military operations significantly. Troop movements that should take hours require days, as every vehicle is stopped and every occupant questioned. Supply convoys sit idle at checkpoints, while drivers attempt to prove their American identity. Units rushing to reinforce threatened sectors are delayed by repeated interrogations. Commanders find their orders questioned by subordinates who suspect everyone might be a German infiltrator. The psychological impact on the German infiltrators, still behind American lines, is severe. Those who studied military procedures, learned rank insignia, and memorized army organization suddenly find none of that matters. What matters is whether they know who plays center field for the Yankees, whether they know Mickey Mouse's girlfriend is Minnie, whether they know the capital of their alleged home state. Cultural knowledge absorbed naturally over a lifetime cannot be taught in 6 weeks of training. Some infiltrators attempt to avoid checkpoints entirely, traveling cross-country or through forests. This makes them more conspicuous to American patrols. Others try to bluff through checkpoints, offering excuses for why they can't answer questions. Few succeed. Fritz Christ, the young Luftwaffe translator who thought he'd avoid combat, has his own close call. Not at a checkpoint, but from his own side. Luftwaffe fighters strafe his disguised vehicle, not realizing it contains Germans. "I jumped off the lorry and hid in a ditch before the vehicle exploded in a ball of fire," he later recalls. Nobody had told the Luftwaffe what was going on. Another commando surrenders to an American MP, only to discover the MP is also German, also working for Operation Greif. The operation that was supposed to spread confusion succeeds beyond anyone's expectations. Unfortunately, most of that confusion affects the Germans themselves. Between December 16th and December 31st, American forces captured 23 members of Operation Greif. Each captured infiltrator faces military trial. The legal situation is clear. Article 23 of the Hague Convention specifically forbids improper use of enemy military insignia and uniform. Soldiers captured wearing enemy uniforms while conducting military operations can be tried as spies rather than treated as prisoners of war. December 21, 1944, Henri-Chapelle, Belgium. The first trial begins. Pernass, Billing, and Schmidt face charges of violating the laws of war by wearing American uniforms while conducting military operations. The evidence is overwhelming. They were captured in American uniforms with American weapons, carrying American identification, but wearing German field gray underneath. The trial is swift. All three are convicted and sentenced to death by firing squad. Colonel E.M. Brannan of the Staff Judge Advocate reviews the proceedings the next day, upholding the findings. Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges, commander of the 1st U.S. Army, approves and confirms the sentences that afternoon. December 23, 1944. 2 days before Christmas. American military police lead the 3 Germans to the execution site. Captain J. Iser of the 633rd Medical Clearing Station pins white paper targets over their hearts. Schmidt's glasses are removed. The prisoners are blindfolded. Military police form the firing squad. In his final moment, Billing shouts, "Long live our Führer, Adolf Hitler!" The rifles fire. All three men die instantly. Their bodies are cut down, carried away, and buried. Eventually, they will be interred at the German military cemetery at Lommel, Belgium, where they rest today alongside more than 39,000 other German war dead. 13 additional Operation Greif participants are tried and executed at either Henri-Chapelle or Hürtgen between December 21st and December 31st. Wilhelm Wiesenfeld, Manfred Pernass, Hans Röschert, Arno Kröver, Günther Schulz, Egbert Meike, Horst Gehrig, Norbert Pohlmann, Ralph Benjamin Mehl, Hans Witzek, Otto Finke, Alfred Franz, Anton Maruk. Each execution follows military trial. Each trial finds the defendants guilty of violating the Hague Convention. Each sentence is reviewed and approved by senior commanders. The executions are carried out with military precision, without malice, but without mercy. Team leader Gustav Schulz is tried by military commission in May 1945, after Germany's surrender, and executed near Braunschweig on June 14th. In total, 17 Operation Greif participants are executed for wearing enemy uniforms. The operation's tactical accomplishments are minimal. No bridges are captured. No major demolitions succeed. No critical communications are permanently disrupted. A few road signs are reversed. Some telephone lines are cut. Several American units receive false orders, though most are quickly corrected, but the psychological impact vastly exceeds any tactical results. For weeks, American forces operate under the assumption that German infiltrators might be anywhere. The checkpoint delays slow the American response to the German penetration. The widespread suspicion degrades unit cohesion. The Battle of the Bulge itself proceeds independent of Operation Greif's failure. At Bastogne, American defenders hold out despite being surrounded. When German officers deliver a surrender ultimatum, Acting Commander Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe responds with a single typed word that becomes legendary: nuts. The 101st Airborne holds Bastogne until relieved by Lieutenant General George Patton's Third Army on December 26th. By early January, Allied counterattacks eliminate the Bulge and restore the front lines. The battle lasts from December 16, 1944, to January 25, 1945. More than 1 million men participate. American casualties exceed 80,000, including 19,000 killed and 23,000 captured. German casualties are similar, but Germany cannot replace those losses. The battle marks the end of Germany's ability to conduct offensive operations in the West. For Otto Skorzeny, Operation Greif is over by December 17th, when Panzer Brigade 150 converts to conventional operations. On December 21st, the brigade attempts to capture Malmedy, but is repulsed. Skorzeny is wounded by artillery shrapnel near Ligneuville. He recovers and continues serving until Germany's surrender. In May 1945, Skorzeny surrenders to the 30th Infantry Regiment. And this is where most people think the story ends. But they're wrong. September 1947. Dachau, Germany. Otto Skorzeny stands trial at the Dachau Military Tribunal. He and 9 officers of Panzer Brigade 150 face charges of improperly using American uniforms by entering combat disguised, treacherously firing upon American forces, and wrongfully obtaining American uniforms and Red Cross parcels from prisoner-of-war camps. The trial lasts 3 weeks. Skorzeny's defense rests on a crucial distinction. His men had been ordered to remove American uniforms before engaging in actual combat. The disguises were for infiltration and deception, not for fighting. Then a surprise defense witness proves decisive. F.F.E. Yeo-Thomas, A former British Special Operations Executive agent testifies that Allied forces had used identical tactics. He had personally worn German uniforms behind enemy lines during missions in France. The military tribunal draws a clear distinction between using enemy uniforms during combat and using them for deception. Italien Fi, 633 Fi Samaidul, cannot be proven that Skorzeny ordered his men to fight while wearing American uniforms. Dantil, September 9, 1947. The tribunal acquits all defendants. The verdict is controversial. 17 of Skorzeny's men had been executed for the same actions for which he is acquitted. The difference appears to be timing and evidence. The men executed in December 1944 were captured in American uniforms. Skorzeny, tried in 1947, can demonstrate his orders prohibited combat while disguised. Skorzeny is handed over to German authorities for denazification proceedings, but in July 1948, he escapes from an internment camp in Darmstadt. Former SS officers, disguised as American military police, facilitate his escape. Some historians speculate American intelligence may have tacitly allowed or even assisted the escape. Though no evidence confirms this. Skorzeny spends time hiding on a Bavarian farm, then in Salzburg and Paris, eventually settling in Spain under the protection of Francisco Franco's fascist government. In 1953, he begins working as a military advisor to Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, and this is where our story takes its most remarkable turn. 1962, the Middle East. Israel faces a nightmare scenario. Egypt, its primary enemy, is developing strategic missiles with the help of dozens of German scientists. Former Nazi rocket experts who once worked on the V-2 program are now building weapons designed to strike Israeli cities. For Israel, thinking about German Nazi scientists working on missiles aimed at Jewish population centers is an existential threat that must be stopped at any cost. Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, launches a campaign to intimidate these scientists. Threatening letters, phone calls in the middle of the night, letter bombs. One package bomb kills 5 Egyptian workers at a rocket factory. But intimidation has limits. What Mossad really needs is an inside man, someone close to the scientists, someone who understands their world, someone who can identify them, locate them, access them. In short, Mossad needs a Nazi, and they know exactly which Nazi they need. Otto Skorzeny, the man who trained Arab volunteers in commando tactics, the man who advised Egyptian forces, the man who maintained contact with former SS officers and Nazi scientists across Europe and the Middle East, the man who, by all rights, should be on Mossad's hit list himself. In Israel, a planning team begins work on where and how to kill Skorzeny. But Isser Harel, the head of Mossad, has a bolder plan. Don't kill him. Recruit him. The task of recruiting Skorzeny falls to Josef Ranen, the same man we saw at the beginning of this story, standing in that chapel in Madrid. But in 1962, Ranen is just Joe, an Austrian Jew whose original name was Kurt Weissmann. In 1938, when the Nazis took over Austria, 16-year-old Kurt was sent to British-ruled Palestine. His mother and brother stayed in Europe. Like many Jews in Palestine, he joined the British Army, serving in the Royal Air Force. When the State of Israel was created in 1948, he took a Hebrew name and became one of the first pilots in the Israeli Air Force, eventually becoming its intelligence chief. In 1957, Isser Harel recruited him to Mossad. Now, Harel is asking him to befriend one of the most notorious Nazi commandos, to turn an SS officer into an Israeli asset. For Ranen, this is almost unbearable. These are the people who destroyed the Jewish communities of his homeland, who killed members of his family, who would have killed him if he hadn't escaped. And now he's being asked to befriend one, to turn him, to run him as an agent. Imagine the psychological complexity of this moment. Rhiannon escaped Austria at 16, leaving behind his mother and brother. He joined the British RAF, hoping for a chance to fight the Germans. When Israel was founded, he became one of its first fighter pilots, then its Air Force intelligence chief. His entire adult life has been defined by survival and by fighting against the regime that tried to exterminate his people. And now his handler, Isser Harel, is asking him to shake hands with a man who wore the SS uniform, to smile at him, to gain his trust, to manipulate him, to use him. The cognitive dissonance must have been overwhelming. How do you reconcile your identity as a Holocaust survivor with your role as a professional intelligence officer? How do you separate the personal from the professional when the personal is genocide and the professional requires you to work with a perpetrator? But Rhiannon is a professional, and Israel needs this. The German scientists working for Egypt represent an existential threat. If Egypt develops the capability to strike Israeli cities with advanced missiles, the consequences could be catastrophic. Hundreds of thousands of Jewish lives could be at risk. So Rhiannon does what intelligence officers do. He compartmentalizes. He focuses on the mission. He tells himself that using Skorzeny isn't forgiving him, isn't excusing what he did, isn't validating his ideology. It's simply using a tool, a very dangerous, very untrustworthy, morally repugnant tool, but a tool nonetheless. This is the dark side of intelligence work that most people never see. The compromises, the alliances with people you'd never shake hands with in normal life. The moral calculations where the ends might justify means that would be unthinkable in any other context. The approach is carefully planned. Mossad identifies a vulnerability. Skorzeny's wife, Countess Ilse von Finkenstein, described by CIA sources as a very attractive and highly intelligent woman, she's the moving force behind her famous husband. She has connections to multiple intelligence services and maintains business interests across Europe. An Israeli agent and a female helper meet Skorzeny and his wife at a bar in Madrid. The two couples end up at Skorzeny's villa. Suddenly, Skorzeny pulls a gun and threatens to kill them. He believes they're Israeli agents sent to assassinate him. The Israelis stay calm. "We don't want to kill you," they say. "We want to hire you." Skorzeny considers this. He doesn't want money, he says, but he'll help in exchange for one thing: convince Simon Wiesenthal to remove him from his list of wanted war criminals. The Israelis agree. Later, they approach Wiesenthal with the request. The famous Nazi hunter refuses categorically. He will never take Skorzeny off his list, so Mossad does what intelligence agencies do. They forge a document claiming Wiesenthal has pardoned Skorzeny and present it to him as genuine. Satisfied, Skorzeny agrees to work with Israel. They fly him to Israel, take him through Mossad's training facilities, and in what must be one of the most surreal moments in intelligence history, they bring him to Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Memorial and Museum. Perhaps they think confronting the evidence of Nazi atrocities might spark some remorse, some recognition of what his regime did. It doesn't work. Skorzeny shows no sign of guilt, no recognition of wrongdoing. Israeli psychologists analyze him and conclude he has no moral compass whatsoever. And yet, this assessment raises fascinating questions. What does it mean to have no moral compass? Is Skorzeny a sociopath, genuinely incapable of empathy? Or is he something more complex, someone who's constructed an identity around loyalty and professionalism that allows him to compartmentalize his actions? He served Hitler. He wore the SS uniform. He executed operations for a regime responsible for genocide. But he never directly participated in the Holocaust. He was a soldier, a commando, someone who saw himself as executing military operations. Does that distinction matter? Can you serve an evil regime without being evil yourself? These aren't questions with easy answers, and Mossad's psychologists, concluding he has no moral compass, are making a pragmatic assessment, not a philosophical one. They're not trying to understand Skorzeny's soul. They're trying to understand whether they can trust him to complete his missions. And here's what's remarkable. Despite showing zero remorse, Skorzeny becomes an enthusiastic and cooperative agent for the Jewish state. Why? What motivates a man who supposedly has no moral compass to work for the people his regime tried to exterminate? Some speculate he craved adventure. After years of relative quiet in Spain, perhaps he missed the excitement of covert operations, the thrill of danger, the satisfaction of executing complex missions. Working for Mossad gave him that back, even if it meant working for the other side. Others suggest pure pragmatism. Mossad could reach him anywhere, could kill him at any time. By cooperating, he bought himself protection. By becoming valuable, he made himself untouchable. Still others wonder about something deeper. Maybe, despite showing no remorse at Yad Vashem, some part of him recognized that the regime he served had been wrong. Not morally wrong in a way he could articulate or admit, but historically wrong. Germany lost. The Nazis were defeated. Their ideology was discredited. Maybe working for Israel was his way of acknowledging that reality without having to explicitly renounce his past, or maybe he simply didn't care. Maybe to him it was all just missions, objectives, operations. Hitler gave him targets. Now Mossad gives him targets. The ideology behind them doesn't matter. Only the execution does. Whatever his motivations, Skorzeny proves to be an excellent agent. The man who served Hitler, who wore the SS uniform, who executed operations for the Third Reich. Now works for Israel. He provides detailed intelligence on the German scientists working for Egypt. Names, addresses, personal information, travel schedules, security details. He mails at least one letter bomb to Egypt, and then, on September 11, 1962, he does something that crosses every line imaginable. Munich, Germany. September 11, 1962, Dr. Heinz Krug, a German rocket scientist working for Egypt, has a meeting with Otto Skorzeny. Krug hopes the famous war hero can help develop a strategy to protect him and other scientists from Israeli threats. Krug knows he's a target. The letter bombs, the threatening phone calls, the mysterious attacks on his colleagues, they've all made it clear that someone wants the German scientists out of Egypt. When Skorzeny, the legendary commando, offers to meet and discuss security arrangements, it must seem like providence. Who better to advise on protection than one of the most famous special operations commanders in history? They meet in Munich. Skorzeny suggests they discuss it privately and drives Krug out to a forest outside the city. Krug probably feels safe. He's with Otto Skorzeny, the man who rescued Mussolini, the man who kidnapped the son of Hungary's regent, a fellow German, a fellow veteran, someone who understands the world of covert operations and knows how to survive in it. What Krug doesn't know is that the man he's trusting for protection is the very threat he's fleeing from. What happens next has been pieced together from Israeli intelligence sources and investigative journalism. Krug is never seen again. According to Dan Raviv and Yossi Melman, two journalists who've written extensively about Israeli intelligence, the man who pulled the trigger was Otto Skorzeny. Think about what this means. Skorzeny doesn't just provide intelligence. He doesn't just offer names and addresses. He personally executes the assassination. A former SS officer personally pulling the trigger on behalf of the Israeli intelligence service, killing a German scientist in a forest outside Munich. The irony is almost unbearable. The method is almost identical to how the Nazis themselves disposed of countless victims. Take them to a remote location, kill them, dispose of the body. The very tactics the regime Skorzeny served used for genocide, now deployed by him on behalf of the survivors of that genocide. After Krug was shot, 3 Israelis working with Skorzeny poured acid on his body, waited, then buried what remained in a hole they'd dug beforehand. They covered the makeshift grave with lime, so search dogs and wild animals would never pick up the scent of human remains. The operation was supervised by Yitzhak Shamir, who would later become Prime Minister of Israel. One of the others was Zvi Peter Malkin, the man who had tackled Adolf Eichmann in Argentina. These were men who had dedicated their lives to hunting Nazis, to bringing them to justice, to ensuring the Holocaust was never forgotten. And here they were, working with a Nazi, using him as a weapon. Watching him execute a German scientist who, unlike Skorzeny himself, had never worn an SS uniform or served Hitler directly. Krug was a rocket scientist. His crime was working for Egypt. His mistake was trusting the wrong German and overseeing from a distance. Josef Rahnen, the Viennese Jew who lost his family to the Holocaust, now running a former SS officer as an agent, now responsible for an assassination carried out by the very type of man who destroyed his community. All three of these Jewish men, all of whom lost relatives in the Holocaust, were using a Nazi to execute their enemies. The moral complexity of this arrangement is staggering. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, about revenge, about the compromises nations make when facing existential threats. Is it justice when a Nazi kills for you? Or is it something else? Something darker? Something that violates the very principles you're supposedly defending? Skorzeny continues working for Mossad. He supplies more information on German scientists. He helps identify targets. He provides access to networks of former Nazis and military advisors operating in the Middle East. Why does he do it? What motivates a man with no moral compass to work for the people his regime tried to exterminate? Some speculate he craved adventure and intrigue, that after years of living quietly in Spain, he missed the excitement of secret operations. Others suggest he feared assassination by Mossad and saw cooperation as survival. Still others wonder if, despite showing no remorse at Yad Vashem, some part of him sought atonement. A way to balance the scales, we'll never know. Skorzeny never explained his motives, but he worked for Israel throughout the 1960s, even as he publicly maintained his identity as an unrepentant Nazi, even as he founded the Paladin Group, a mercenary organization that trained guerrillas for right-wing regimes from Greece to Chile, even as he helped found Sededi, a Spanish neo-Nazi organization. He lived in two worlds simultaneously. Nazi legend, Israeli asset, daughter. A man who wore three uniforms, German SS, American disguise, and now in the shadows, working for the Star of David. July 5, 1975. Madrid. Otto Skorzeny dies of lung cancer at age 67. He never denounced Nazism, never expressed regret for his wartime actions, never acknowledged that he worked for Mossad. On August 7th, his funeral takes place at a Catholic chapel in Madrid. Dozens of German military veterans and their wives attend. They give him the one-armed Nazi salute. They sing Hitler's favorite songs. 14 of his medals, many featuring prominent swastikas, are paraded in the funeral procession. Later, his cremated remains will be taken to Vienna, interred in the Skorzeny family plot at Döblinger Friedhof. Another ceremony there, more Nazi salutes, more songs. Among the mourners in Madrid, one man stands apart, younger than the others, watching from the shadows, his face partially hidden as if from habit. Josef Rahnen, the Holocaust survivor, the Mossad handler. He didn't have to come. Mossad didn't send him. He chose to attend, paid his own way, flew to Spain to pay respects to his former agent, the Nazi who became an Israeli assassin. What goes through his mind as he listens to Hitler's songs being sung? As he watches former SS officers salute their fallen comrade? As he thinks about the man in that casket who killed for Israel while never renouncing his Nazi past? We don't know. Rahnen never gave interviews about his relationship with Skorzeny, never explained publicly why he attended the funeral. But we can think about what this moment represents, not just for Ranen, but for the nature of intelligence work itself. Here is a man who escaped the Holocaust as a teenager, who lost family members to the Nazi regime, who spent his entire adult life fighting for Jewish survival, first in the British RAF, then in the Israeli Air Force, then in Mossad, and he's chosen to attend the funeral of a man who served that regime, who wore the SS uniform, who never expressed remorse, who, even in working for Israel, never renounced his Nazi identity. Why? Professional respect? Perhaps. Skorzeny was an effective agent. He kept secrets even unto death. He delivered intelligence and executed operations. In the cold world of espionage, that kind of professionalism matters. A sense of closure? Maybe. For years, Ranen managed this complicated relationship. The Austrian Jew running the Austrian Nazi. Both displaced from their homeland, both serving in the shadows, both keeping secrets from almost everyone around them. With Skorzeny's death, that chapter closes. Perhaps attending the funeral is Ranen's way of acknowledging that closure. Or is it something stranger? Something about shared identity despite everything else? They were both Austrians, both born in Vienna, both shaped by that city's culture and history. One fled it, one served the regime that forced that flight. But they shared a connection to a place, a language, a cultural context that transcended their ideological opposition. In the years Ranen ran Skorzeny, did something resembling understanding develop? Not friendship, certainly, not forgiveness, but perhaps recognition. The recognition that people are more complicated than the uniforms they wear or the causes they serve. Or maybe Ranen attended simply because in the world of intelligence, when your agent dies, you pay respects. It's professional courtesy. Nothing more, nothing less. The emotions, the history, the moral complexity, all of that gets compartmentalized, filed away, and you do what the job requires, even if that job is standing in a chapel full of former Nazis singing Hitler's songs. The image of Ranen at that funeral, hiding in the shadows out of habit, watching former SS officers give Nazi salutes, is perhaps the perfect encapsulation of intelligence work's moral ambiguity. There is no clear right or wrong here. No simple heroes or villains. Just people making impossibly complicated decisions in pursuit of survival and national security. One final secret between handler and agent. One final tribute from the man who ran him. The circle closing in a chapel in Madrid, with hymns to Hitler echoing off the walls, and one Jewish man standing silently among the mourners. So what do we make of this story? Operation Greif failed in its tactical objectives but succeeded in creating chaos far beyond its actual capabilities. The mere possibility of infiltration created panic, affecting hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The checkpoint interrogations, absurd as they sometimes seemed, worked because they tested knowledge that genuine Americans possessed naturally. Cultural knowledge absorbed through lived experience over years cannot be quickly taught. Identity isn't just about speaking the language or wearing the right uniform. It's about shared experiences, common references, collective memories. Being American meant knowing who plays center field for the Yankees, who Mickey Mouse's girlfriend is, what state capitals are. Things you absorb naturally from childhood, not things you learn in 6 weeks of training. This principle remains relevant. Modern identity verification, from security questions to behavioral analysis, relies on the same insight. Cultural fluency requires immersion and time. The checkpoint guards asking about baseball didn't know they were creating folklore. They were just solving an immediate problem, improvising security measures. Their solution worked because it was rooted in genuine shared culture. The 17 men executed at Henri-Chapelle and Hurtgen are remembered today primarily through their graves at Lommel. The key cemetery makes no distinction between those executed as spies and those killed in battle. All are German war dead. Manfred Pernass was 23 years old. Günther Billing was 21. Wilhelm Schmidt was 24. Each was someone's son, perhaps someone's brother. Each made choices that led to a frozen morning in Belgium, to white paper targets pinned over their hearts, to blindfolds and rifles. But who were they, really? Not just names in an after-action report, but human beings with histories, hopes, reasons for being there. Pernass came from Gollnow in Pomerania, a region that would soon cease to exist as German territory, absorbed into Poland after the war. He would never see that transformation, never know that the home he grew up in would be in a different country, speak a different language. His war ended at 23 before he'd really had a chance to live. Billing, at 21, was a true believer. His final words, "Long live our Führer, Adolf Hitler," weren't just defiance. They were the words of someone who'd been shaped by Nazi ideology during his most formative years. He was 11 when Hitler came to power. He knew nothing else. His entire adolescence, his entire young adulthood, had been defined by the Third Reich. Even facing death, even knowing his mission had failed, even understanding that Germany was losing the war, he couldn't let go of the ideology that had defined his identity. Schmidt was the quiet one. In the records, there's less about him. He said less during interrogation. His final moments are described with fewer details. Sometimes history remembers the loud ones, the defiant ones, better than the silent ones. But silence can be its own form of tragedy. What was he thinking in those final minutes? Did he believe in the cause? Did he regret volunteering? Did he think of family, of home, of a life that would never be lived? These weren't cartoon villains. They were young men who made a series of choices, each seeming reasonable at the time, that led inexorably to their deaths. They volunteered for what seemed like an exciting mission. They trained as ordered. They followed their commanders. They wore enemy uniforms because that was the operation. And then they were captured, tried, and executed, all within less than a week. The speed of it is jarring. December 17th, captured. December 21st, tried. December 23rd, executed. 6 days from freedom to death. 6 days to process that your life is over, that you'll never see home again, that at 21 or 23 or 24, your story is finished. They weren't particularly important men. They accomplished little. Their operation failed comprehensively. Yet their executions marked an important moment in military and legal history, clarifying the application of international law regarding the use of enemy uniforms in warfare. The Dachau trials established that using enemy uniforms for deception is a legitimate ruse de guerre, provided combatants remove the disguises before engaging in combat. This precedent would influence interpretation of international law for decades. But perhaps the most important lesson comes from what happened after, from the story that remained hidden for decades. The recruitment of Otto Skorzeny by Mossad reveals the moral complexity of intelligence work, the compromises nations make when facing existential threats, the uncomfortable alliances formed in the shadows. Israel, a state founded in the aftermath of the Holocaust, hired a man who served the regime that perpetrated it, not because they forgave him, not because they trusted him, but because they needed what he could provide. And he provided it, enthusiastically, without ever renouncing his Nazi past, without ever acknowledging the evil of the regime he served. This paradox sits at the heart of intelligence work. The ends justifying means that would be unthinkable in any other context. Using monsters to hunt monsters. Yosef Rayanan, flying at his own expense to attend Skorzeny's funeral, embodies this complexity. A Holocaust survivor mourning a Nazi, not because he liked him, not because he forgave him, but because in the strange world of espionage, they had been partners, handler and agent, Austrian and Austrian, both living in the shadows, both keeping secrets, both serving purposes larger than themselves. The man who wore 3 uniforms taught us that identity is complicated, that people contain multitudes, that the same person can be Hitler's favorite commando, an American impersonator, and an Israeli assassin. That war makes strange bedfellows. That survival requires compromise. That the line between hero and villain is sometimes drawn in sand, easily shifted by circumstances and necessity. The Battle of the Bulge ended in late January 1945. Allied forces resumed their advance toward Germany. Within 4 months, the Third Reich collapsed. Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945. The 17 executed Operation Greif participants were already in their graves, resting in Belgian soil far from home. Skorzeny lived another 30 years, dying peacefully in his bed, honored by his former comrades, having never faced justice for his role in Nazi operations. And Yosef Ranen, he left Mossad, became a successful businessman in Israel, and lived out his years knowing secrets most people would never believe. In the end, Operation Greif was a footnote in the Battle of the Bulge, a failed mission that caused more problems for Germany than for the Allies, a tactical disaster that somehow achieved strategic psychological impact. But the story of what came after, the recruitment, the assassination, the funeral, that's a story about something deeper, about the price of survival, about the compromises we make, about the shadows where nations operate when facing existential threats, about the strange truth that sometimes the man who wore your enemy's uniform might end up wearing yours, even if he never admits it, even if he never regrets it, even if, to the day he dies, he remains what he always was, the most dangerous man in Europe, who, for a few years in the shadows of the Cold War, became Israel's most unlikely weapon. If you visit the German military cemetery at Lommel, Belgium today, you'll find more than 39,000 graves, row after row of stone crosses marking the resting places of German soldiers who died in the Battle of the Bulge and other operations. Somewhere among them lie Manfred Pernass, Günther Billing, and Wilhelm Schmidt, the 3 men captured at the checkpoint outside Aywaille, the first to be tried and executed for Operation Greif. The cemetery makes no distinction between them and the soldiers who died in conventional combat. All are remembered equally. All are maintained with the same care. Their story is preserved in military archives, in trial transcripts, in the memories of veterans who witnessed the checkpoint paranoia. But for most people, they're just names. Just numbers among thousands. The checkpoint interrogations they inspired became part of American military folklore. The image of soldiers being asked who plays center field for the Yankees or who Mickey Mouse's girlfriend is symbolizes how cultural identity served as a security tool during crisis. But these weren't just colorful anecdotes. They were improvised solutions to a real threat. Imperfect solutions that caused their own problems, detaining innocent soldiers and slowing military movements, but solutions that fundamentally worked because they tested something impossible to fake: genuine cultural fluency, and this principle has only become more relevant with time. In our interconnected world where identity fraud is increasingly sophisticated, we've returned again and again to the insight those checkpoint guards discovered. That authentic identity is encoded in layers of cultural knowledge that accumulate over years of lived experience. Consider modern security questions. Your mother's maiden name, your first pet's name, the street you grew up on, your first car, the name of your elementary school. These are all variations on the checkpoint interrogations of 1944. They work not because the information is secret, but because it's personal, specific, and embedded in your life history in ways that are difficult for outsiders to research or replicate. Social media platforms use similar techniques. What's your relationship status? Where did you go to high school? What city were you born in? The goal isn't just verification, it's authentication through accumulated context. Even modern intelligence agencies use cultural knowledge as part of deep cover preparation. When the CIA or MI6 creates a false identity for an operative, They don't just forge documents. They create an entire life history, complete with cultural touchstones, personal memories, local knowledge, and the kind of casual fluency that can only come from extensive preparation and training. But as the German infiltrators discovered in 1944, there's a limit to what can be taught. You can memorize facts, but you can't fake the unconscious knowledge that comes from growing up in a culture. The way you move, the idioms you use without thinking, the cultural references you make automatically, the jokes you understand instinctively. All of these create a pattern that's nearly impossible to perfectly replicate. This is why, even in 2025, with all our advanced technology, cultural knowledge remains one of the most reliable forms of authentication. Because it's not just about what you know, it's about how you know it. The difference between learned information and lived experience. Otto Skorzeny's legacy is more complicated. The daring rescuer of Mussolini, the mastermind of Operation Greif, the founder of the Paladin Group, which some historians consider a forerunner of modern private military companies, the Nazi who never renounced Nazism, and secretly, for crucial years, a Mossad asset who provided intelligence and executed at least one assassination for the State of Israel. This last chapter of his story remained hidden for decades. When journalists Dan Raviv and Yossi Melman published their findings in 2016, many people refused to believe it. The idea seemed too improbable, too morally complicated, too disturbing in its implications. But the evidence is substantial. Multiple Mossad officers confirmed it. The operation fit with documented Israeli activities against German scientists in Egypt. The recruitment matched Mossad's pattern of making pragmatic, uncomfortable alliances when necessary. And Yosef Ranan attending Skorzeny's funeral? That detail is too specific, too bizarre, to be fabricated. It happened. All of it happened. What does this say about us? About the compromises we're willing to make? About the distance between our stated principles and our actual practices when facing existential threats? In public discourse, we talk about justice, about never forgetting, about ensuring that perpetrators of genocide face consequences. The State of Israel was founded in part on the principle of Jewish survival and the determination that never again would mean something. And yet, when confronted with a genuine security threat, Israeli intelligence recruited a man who served the regime responsible for the Holocaust. They didn't forgive him. They didn't excuse him. They didn't validate his ideology. But they used him. This reveals something uncomfortable about how nations actually operate versus how we like to think they operate. In the world of intelligence, moral purity is a luxury that can be sacrificed for operational effectiveness. The ends, when those ends involve preventing existential threats, can justify means that would be unthinkable in peacetime. But at what cost? When you use monsters as weapons, when you shake hands with people who represent everything you oppose, when you compartmentalize morality for operational necessity, what happens to your principles? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're live issues that intelligence agencies and governments continue to grapple with today. The United States worked with former Nazis after World War II through Operation Paperclip. The CIA has employed dictators, drug dealers, and war criminals as assets when their intelligence was valuable enough. Every major intelligence agency has made similar compromises, used bad people to achieve good ends, or at least ends they believed were good. The Skorzeny case is just particularly stark, particularly visible, particularly morally complex. A Holocaust survivor running a Nazi as an agent, a Nazi killing for Israel, all of it hidden for decades, known only to a few, carried out in the shadows where moral clarity gives way to operational necessity. A Holocaust survivor ran a Nazi as an agent, a Nazi assassin killed for Israel. An Austrian Jew mourned an Austrian Nazi in a chapel full of Hitler salutes. The story of Operation Greif turns out to be just the beginning. The opening act in a drama that stretched across 3 decades and challenged everything we think we understand about identity, loyalty, and the moral compromises of survival. So we return to where we began. Madrid, August 1925. A funeral. A man in the shadows. Now you know why he's there. Now you understand what binds him to the man in the casket. Not friendship, not forgiveness, not even mutual respect, but something perhaps stranger. Professional acknowledgement between handler and agent, between two men who lived in the shadows and kept each other's secrets, between the survivor and the perpetrator, brought together by the cold calculations of intelligence work. The man who wore 3 uniforms is dead, but his story lives on, teaching us that history is rarely simple, that people are rarely one thing, that the categories we use to organize the world, hero and villain, good and evil, us and them, sometimes blur in ways that make us profoundly uncomfortable. Operation Greif failed to capture a single bridge. The Battle of the Bulge was won by conventional forces, by the courage of American soldiers holding impossible positions, by commanders like Patton who could turn entire armies on a dime, by defenders at Bastogne who refused to surrender. But the story of Operation Greif, and what came after, tells us something important about warfare in the modern age, about psychological operations, about the power of cultural identity, about the strange alliances formed in the shadows. It also tells us something about where warfare has evolved since 1944. The Paladin group that Skorzeny founded, the mercenary organization that trained guerrillas and conducted covert operations for governments and private clients, was decades ahead of its time. Today, we call them private military companies. Organizations like Blackwater, Wagner Group, and dozens of others employ hundreds of thousands of personnel worldwide, conducting security operations, training missions, and sometimes combat operations in dozens of countries. The model Skorzeny pioneered, of professional soldiers operating outside traditional military structures, has become a multi-billion-dollar global industry. These companies offer governments deniability, flexibility, and specialized capabilities without the political costs of deploying conventional forces. But they also raise the same questions Operation Greif raised about the laws of war, about accountability, about the blurred lines between combatant and civilian. The Hague Convention concerns about soldiers wearing enemy uniforms seem almost quaint compared to modern warfare's complexity. Today we have soldiers in civilian clothes operating alongside actual civilians. We have drones operated by uniformed military personnel and by civilian contractors, sometimes from the same facility. We have special operations forces working in countries where their presence is officially denied. The checkpoint guards trying to distinguish friend from enemy in Belgium faced a simpler problem than what modern security forces confront daily. And the moral compromises Mossad made in recruiting Skorzeny? Those continue too. Intelligence agencies worldwide employ assets whose backgrounds and activities would horrify the public if they became known. The logic is always the same. The intelligence is valuable enough. The threat is serious enough, the operational necessity is compelling, enough to justify working with people who would otherwise be considered enemies or criminals. Skorzeny's transformation from Nazi commando to Mossad assassin wasn't an anomaly. It was a preview of how modern intelligence operates. In a world of asymmetric threats, terrorist networks, and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the old categories of friend and enemy become fluid. Yesterday's enemy might become today's asset. Today's ally might be tomorrow's adversary. This doesn't make it right. It just makes it real. The world of intelligence operates according to different rules than the world of public discourse, not because intelligence officers are immoral, but because they're dealing with threats that require responses most people never have to contemplate. When facing existential threats, when lives hang in the balance, when traditional methods prove insufficient, the compromises begin. And once they begin, where do they end? These aren't abstract philosophical questions. They're live issues that governments and intelligence agencies continue to grapple with today. The United States worked with former Nazis after World War II through Operation Paperclip, bringing German scientists to America despite their roles in the Nazi regime. The CIA has employed dictators, drug dealers, and war criminals as assets when their intelligence was valuable enough. Every major intelligence agency has made similar compromises, used bad people to achieve what they believed were good ends. The Skorzeny case is just particularly visible, particularly stark, particularly impossible to rationalize away. A Holocaust survivor running a Nazi as an agent, a Nazi killing for Israel, all of it hidden for decades, known only to a few, carried out in the shadows, where moral clarity gives way to operational necessity, and where the principles we claim to uphold encounter the messy realities of survival and security. Understanding doesn't mean approval, but it means recognizing the complexity, the impossible choices, the compromises made in the shadows so that others can live in relative safety, often blissfully unaware of what's done in their names by their governments, using their tax dollars and operating under their democratic mandate, and about the truth that sometimes the most dangerous man in Europe might be working for you, even if you'd prefer not to know how or why. This has been the story of Operation Greif, of the checkpoint interrogations that became folklore, of the 17 men executed for wearing enemy uniforms, of the most widespread paranoia in American military history. But most importantly, it's been the story of what came after, of secrets kept for decades, of unlikely alliances, of moral complexity in the face of existential threat. The story of the man who wore 3 uniforms. For the 17 men executed at Henri-Chapelle and Hürtgen, for the soldiers of all nations who fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and for those who live and work in the shadows, keeping secrets we may never know